Could the Philadelphia Phillies make a big-time swing for the number one free agent on the market this offseason? Find out if it's realistic on today's episode.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, this is Locked On Phillies. I'm your host, Connor Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us today. We come to you as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You might know me for some of my other work in the sports talk space. I've been on air over at 97.5 The Fanatic, doing sports talk radio here in Philadelphia for over 6 years. I've been a credentialed Philadelphia Phillies media member for the past 4 seasons, and I've been the host of Locked On Phillies for the past 4 years. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. The Phillies have already basically told us we're going to have a similar payroll to what we had last year. That's what Dave Dombrowski talked about in his end-of-season media availability. So does that mean that a big swing for a big-time player is off the table? Not necessarily. We're going to start our evaluation of specific free agents. I'm going to tell you how we evaluate that over the course of the offseason because there's going to be 3 very important factors. But we'll also take a look later on in the episode at potential positional changes for some Phillies players in the 2026 season. Will there be some guys shifted around? Because we had a lot of that talk during the season this year. And the return of Mailbag Monday, in some sense. We're going to do it a little bit differently today because I didn't tease it on Friday or Saturday's episode. We're going to respond to some YouTube comments and some popular questions that we've been getting the past couple of shows. So we'll get into all of that on today's episode. But let's start our free agent evaluation first and foremost. What we're going to do is we're going to look at individual players. There are so many free agents around baseball every year with how many players are on rosters, and what the Phillies need is plentiful, depending on who they bring back and who they don't bring back. We will look at some of their own free agents, but we will also look at guys out on the open market from other teams. There are going to be 3 main factors that we're going to look at. The realism of it. How realistic is it that this player is actually an option for the Phillies? The other thing we're going to look at is cost. How much would it cost? How expensive would the contract be? How long would the contract be for these specific players that we're going to highlight? And how is the fit? Is this player a perfect fit for Philadelphia? Yeah, middle of the road, they could work, or yeah, I don't really see how that guy works here. So for each of those 3 options, I'm either going to tell you it's high likelihood, middle likelihood, or low likelihood. Super expensive, mid-level expensive, pretty cheap. Great fit, okay fit, bad fit. You get the idea, right? And the first person we're going to talk about is Kyle Tucker. Now, I've been looking at a lot of the top free agents for the 2025-26 offseason lists, and Kyle Tucker is topping all of them. And there's a good reason. He's a great, great baseball player. And when you just look at the position, playing the outfield, you say, okay, he's at a position of need for the Philadelphia Phillies. He could help get them over the top. Why would the Phillies not do it? He had a solid year in Chicago this past year, a little bit of injury-plagued season for the Chicago Cubs, who acquired him from the Houston Astros in a big-time trade. And for the Cubs to not re-sign him would be crazy, but it seems likely that they're not going to be able to play in the market of Kyle Tucker. It just feels like, from stuff that he said at the end of the Chicago Cubs season in the postseason this year, he expects to go elsewhere. And that means the Philadelphia Phillies could be in play. In 136 games this past year, he slashed 266, 377, 464. Went yard 22 times, stole 25 bases, so he's an athlete, we know. Plays out in the outfield. Okay defense. He's a good defender. Like, you're not going to lose anything. The Phillies had Kyle Schwarber in the outfield for a World Series appearing team, Nick Castellanos in the outfield. Like, they could survive with defense. Isn't a huge issue for this team, especially if Justin Crawford comes up and is a plus defender like it seems he could be. Bottom line is, Kyle Tucker's a really damn good baseball player, and he is available, and the Phillies should kick the tires for sure. This would be realistic if Kyle Schwarber doesn't resign. So as far as the realism, because I've already told you on the podcast multiple times, I think it's a pretty darn sure thing that Kyle Schwarber is going to be back and the Phillies are going to pay him a long-term lucrative contract. I do not think then that the overall realism of a Kyle Tucker acquisition is high. I'm going to give this a low on the realistic scale because there's going to be a lot of teams in the market, and the Phillies already have their eyes set on their own slugger and Kyle Schwarber. The other thing, which will take us into the fit conversation, is that he's another lefty bat. Bryce Harper, Kyle Schwarber, Bryson Stott, Max Kepler this past year, Brandon Marsh. Like, they had so many lefties and a couple of them just not good against lefty pitchers. And it feels like the big-time power bats for the Phillies are all on the left side of the plate. JT Realmuto's not a power hitter. He's a nice hitter. Nick Castellanos not a power hitter. Doubles guy at best. Alec Bohm, clearly not a power hitter. Hits for average. Trea Turner, not a power hitter. Led the National League in average this year, but didn't have plus power numbers, right? So ideally, if the Phillies are going to go out and get a power hitter to add to this roster, he'd be a right-handed bat. So position of need, the fit is really good because outfield is always going to be a major need for the Phillies, it seems. I think we just need to accept that until something majorly changes with this farm system and the drafting or the focus on how you build this team. Your outfield is always going to have open spots. So fit positionally makes sense, but handedness doesn't really seem to. So I'm going to put Kyle Tucker as a mid-level fit. Now, he's so talented that he could fit on any team anywhere, right? I'm not saying the Phillies, because he's left-handed, wouldn't take Kyle Tucker at all. Hey, that's not my point here. But if we're getting down to the real nitty-gritty of would he be the best bang for your buck left-handed bat, power bat, adding to a Kyle Schwarber, Bryce Harper, Trea Turner core, middle of the road, I think, when you evaluate all of that stuff. And then the final thing to look at with Kyle Tucker is the cost. And he is going to be expensive. He is 28 years old right now, which puts him right in that zone for a long-term deal. You've seen big-time, long-term contracts in baseball become more and more prevalent as the years go on. Now, will the looming lockout of 2027 affect the value of Kyle Tucker? It's tough to say for a contract for a player of that magnitude, right? I imagine most teams that are in on Kyle Tucker will say, we're planning on 4, 5, 6, 7 years of this guy, big-time, long-term deal. So 2027 doesn't really factor into the equation because he's going to be here long-term, whether we lose the season in 2027 or not. So he's going to be high on the cost list. Very expensive contract. Maybe the most lucrative that is given out this offseason will be to Kyle Tucker. So looking at that, you're interested, right? But it doesn't seem to fit the Phillies' current situation. He is a player that would fit the roster. He is a player that is incredibly talented, but with the realistic expectations for this Phillies offseason, I don't think Kyle Tucker's ultimately going to be in play for them. But it points to a couple of things that we'll use in evaluating other players. Handedness is going to be a really big part of this conversation. The Phillies need to find right-handed pop. Outfield is going to be a really big part of this conversation because if Kyle Tucker played, I don't know, second base, I'm just throwing out a random position. Like, I don't know. Shortstop, I don't know. But outfield gives him an extra notch up in the how does he fit conversation. And that's something that we'll be looking at. All outfielders, they get bonus points when looked at as a potential partner for the Philadelphia Phillies in free agency. And the other thing that we're going to discuss a lot with these players is the length of contract. The lockout's going to be brought up a bunch in 2027 if that does indeed happen. But adding a long-term player to a core of long-term aging players, when you look at the Phillies' current contract situation, could take some guys out of the mix. As much as I still think this team is going to be competitive at a high level next year, you're going to have to be careful about adding too many aging guys on long-term deals that are tough to get out of. And I know if you follow the Phillies, you would probably respond to me saying, Connor, they've already done that. I understand. I can't undo what they've already done. And maybe that sounds silly saying, well, you can't get too many of those guys because you probably think they already have too many. And you're not alone in that. I do somewhat agree with you. But at this point, you've already steered into that curve. You got to deal with where you're at right now. So maybe the Phillies just say, hey, we've already decided to die on this hill. What's one more long-term deal for a player that will be into their mid to late 30s by the time it's done, as long as the player is talented? And we'll deal with the back end of that contract when we get there. I don't know how much the Phillies commit to that, and Kyle Schwarber will be a good indicator how they handle his contract situation and his free agency and what they reportedly offer him or what they sign him for if they do indeed get the deal done. But that's where Kyle Tucker stands. Great free agent option. I don't think that the Phillies are going to be in the market for Kyle Tucker because their focus is going to be on re-signing Kyle Schwarber. That's just where I'm at with that one. We're going to continue to do daily evaluations. Some shows will do 2 players, depending on what the news cycle is for the Philadelphia Phillies. But looking at the fit, the cost, and, of course, the realism of the potential move or lack thereof. Coming up next, how realistic is it that we could see some positional changes for Philadelphia Phillies players? With some open spots due to free agency, who could shift around? And are we starting to get to the point where even the crazy positional change ideas that some people floated out this past year have to be on the table to try and help this team do something to get back over the hump of getting knocked out in first rounds of the postseason? We'll talk about all of it as we continue today's episode. Let's talk about FanDuel first, though, because the NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Philly 2-0 to start the year, man. They've looked good, and I've made money betting on them with FanDuel. Even if you miss the start of the game or you want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who's going to score next to fourth quarter comebacks, which the Sixers have already had 2 of this year. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. Yeah, parlays in the middle of the game when it's already started. That's how you're going to find your way to the big bucks. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making the late push. You have even more to root for when you watch a guy like Quentin Grimes hit a last-second three-pointer for the Sixers to knock off the Hornets. That's what happened this weekend. If you bet on it with FanDuel, you're a happy person today. But right now, FanDuel is also giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins, so everybody can be a happy person. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. We've got a lot of great content coming your way, starting to talk about specific free agents and how they fit with the Phillies. So I want to implore you, become part of our Everydayers Club. Subscribe to the Locked On Phillies YouTube. It's free and easy to hit that subscribe button, and it'll get you notifications when new episodes are posted. There's no reason not to do it. You'll be able to catch up on all your great Phillies news and hear everything that we got to say here on the podcast. And it costs you nothing more than a second of your time. Appreciate everyone who's already subscribed. That subscriber base is growing every day, and I'm very, very thankful for you guys wanting to hear what I have to say about the Phillies. But if you can't watch on YouTube, you can also listen. We're available wherever you get your podcasts, so go ahead and check that out. Locked On Phillies is your number one place for Monday to Friday daily Philadelphia Phillies content, even through the off season. Could we see some new positions for some Phillies players in 2026? There were a lot of comments that I got on podcast episodes, on the radio side doing my other job, that I just saw on social media being thrown out by fans or reporters alike about potential position changes for guys with the Phillies this past year. Because frankly, the outfield was such a black hole for the first couple months of the season that folks were finding any way possible to add some juice to that part of the Phillies lineup, to the point where we had Edmundo Sosa playing left field and robbing a home run down in Atlanta. Did you forget about that game in that moment? Yeah, well, that was fun. But it wasn't fun? A ball dropping in between him and Yohan Rojas because they didn't communicate, because Edmundo Sosa hadn't played left field at the major league level before that. There was some wild stuff going on this year. And while there were one-offs where guys tried different positions, there are opportunities for the Phillies to potentially shift around their defensive alignment this next season. I think the number one place everyone's head is going to go when I bring up position changes is the shortstop. Trea Turner, pretty much since he got here, people have talked about playing him at second, playing him in the outfield, changing his position because he is not a plus defensive shortstop. You saw it in the series against the Dodgers. That play that he made, streaking in to try and make a play on a chopper and throw home to JT Realmuto, wrong side of the plate, Dodgers score, creates a big inning. You'd like to see a major league shortstop make that play. You'd expect to see a major league shortstop make that play, especially in the postseason against a team like the Dodgers, where the margin for error is so thin. Do I think the Philadelphia Phillies move Trea Turner to a different position? I don't. And here's why. It seems like when Trea Turner came here, it was with the belief that he'd be playing shortstop. At some point, you have to do what's best for the baseball team, but I don't think Dave Dombrowski or Rob Thompson are there. Your other options at shortstop, just to think about this: Aiden Miller, who has never played a Major League Baseball game in his life; Bryson Stott, who can't hit lefties. So what, you're going to platoon Turner and Stott at shortstop now, I guess? I don't know. Or Edmundo Sosa, which, if you played him there, then the only other logical place for Turner to go would be second base. Because I do not believe the Phillies see him as an outfielder, and I think that would be crazy to move him from shortstop to a position in center or right or left where, sure, he's played a couple major league games in the outfield, but Trea Turner is not an outfielder. This is not MLB The Show. You can't just put whatever player at whatever position and control him with the PlayStation controller and make everything work. So if there is a change position-wise, for Trea Turner, it happens one way. Aiden Miller comes up. They see him more as a shortstop. Turner shifts to second base. Third base is Alec Bohm or Edmundo Sosa or whatever goes on. Then you got to figure out what to do with Bryson Stott, who would be trumped by those other options in that scenario. Speaking of Bryson Stott, I don't think he's going through a positional change. He's great at second base. I don't see that changing. Edmundo Sosa, utility guy. Alec Bohm, if he's still here, will be your third baseman. JT Realmuto, if he's back, will be your catcher. So there's no changes there. But Bryce Harper's another guy whose position has been questioned recently. My argument would be, if you have a Gold Glove nominated defender at a position, you don't change that guy's position. I think that's a pretty simple rule of thumb. But Harper's kind of a unique case because he was a natural, well, not a natural outfielder. He was drafted as a catcher, but he's played more outfield in his career than he has first base. So moving back to the outfield is not like saying Trea Turner should play center field. It's a position he played for a large part of his career when it comes to Bryce Harper. Where it gets really tricky is, how does it affect Bryce Harper's health and longevity to put him back out in the outfield where it's a more physically intensive position? A lot easier to get hurt in the outfield than it is at first base. Running into the wall, diving for balls, running all over the place, a lot more wear and tear on the body to play outfield, a lot more moving around. Do I think that Bryce Harper will be moved back to the outfield? I would heavily lean no. But let's say Kyle Schwarber doesn't re-sign and you sign Pete Alonso, well, then you'd have to have a conversation with Harper and say, hey, you might have to go back to right field, and then have an outfield of Harper in right, a platoon of somebody in Marsh in left, Crawford in center. That could work, but that only happens if you're able to go out and sign Pete Alonso. I think signing Pete Alonso only happens if you're unable to sign Kyle Schwarber, and I believe they're going to be able to sign Kyle Schwarber. In fact, I think it's very likely they do so, and that means Bryce Harper isn't moving positions. And as far as outfield is concerned, I don't think you're making a major shift to where any of these guys play. Brandon Marsh is a corner outfielder. That's evident. Max Kepler won't be back. Nick Castellanos will probably be traded. Harrison Bader's future with the Phillies is up in the air because he has the option to go after free agency this year, and I'd expect him to take it, and I don't know if the Phillies will re-sign him. And Justin Crawford's in the minors. So the outfield's pretty wide open if your name isn't Brandon Marsh. And I've already told you he's a corner outfielder, so I don't see a lot of positional changes for the outfield when it comes to defensive alignment. The only thing that could possibly get a little screwy in the outfield, it depends on where they view Otto Kemp. This Otto Kemp thing is going to be super weird all offseason because Dave Dombrowski was effusive in his praise of Otto Kemp in his end-of-year media availability, as was Rob Thompson. It seems like there's this party line on we really, really like Otto Kemp. And I've told you, I like Otto Kemp. I don't love Otto Kemp as a Major League Baseball player. If they have him out there in the outfield as like a platoon with Brandon Marsh in left, that'll be very interesting. And I guess technically would be a position change for Kemp, who is more of an infielder, but is not good at third base defensively either. So I don't know where you stick Otto Kemp. And I guess that would technically be a position change. So I figured it would be right to mention. But that's the thought on what the Phillies could do tricky defensively to maybe switch things up internally. They only have so much room to add players from the outside to change what they've been doing. Some of it's going to have to be internal change. And some of that could be prompted by positional changes. But each and every one that I went through there was like, only if this happens, only if this happens. And it doesn't seem heavily likely that we'll see crazy new positions for Phillies players this year. But a lot of people ask about it. A lot of people want to talk about it. Those are my thoughts on whether or not that is possible or probable for some of the big names on the Phillies. This is going to be a lot of fun all off season long. We've done segments in the past called Mailbag Monday, where we talk about or answer questions from you, the listeners, the viewers out there. Because I didn't solicit, I went through some YouTube comments and found some very interesting questions or comments that I'd love to respond to from you out there listening. So you might hear yours if you've commented on the YouTube. We'll get into that coming up next. It's a grab bag of different topics as we continue today's episode. Let's talk about game time first, though, because the NFL season's rolling right along. And honestly, there's nothing better than being in the stadium surrounded by fans cheering on your team. But let's be honest, getting tickets can be a hassle between queues and login screens and prices, jumping at checkout. It's super frustrating to try and get tickets unless you use Game Time because they're the app that gives the advantage back to the fans. Game Time's fast, easy, and backed by the Game Time guarantee, which means you'll always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price. Plus, all fees are included. So the price you see is the price you pay. Game Time is the way you want to go for Eagles tickets. The Birds, they're on bye this week, so it gives you plenty of time to plan the next time you go. But I used Game Time to get tickets to a road game when they were up in Minnesota. The Link was rocking this weekend when they took on the Giants. Look for your Eagles tickets and do it through Game Time. The app makes it super simple, and you can even see the exact view from your seat before buying. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and make sure you use code LOCKEDONMLB because that'll give you $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go, and download Game Time today. So I've assembled some comments from our YouTube feed over the past couple of days. These are not all just to the most recent episode that I put out. They're really from like the last week. Now we're going to do questions from the audience, Mailbag Monday as I call it, in a bunch of different ways this offseason. YouTube comments, X comments, or Twitter, whatever you want to call it these days. Stuff like that. I might just find some replies that are not even in solicitation for questions from you. Just like if I see something interesting from a listener that you pose out there, a lot of stuff. I might do text from the radio side where people text into 97.5 The Fanatic because I read the text line. There's some intriguing stuff on there. So there are a lot of ways to join in on the fun we're going to have trying to fix this Philly situation this offseason. I say fun kind of tongue-in-cheek, but it will be fun to interact with all of you more than I get to do during the season when there's just so much to get to with what the team's doing on the field. So let's run through some of these comments from recent YouTube videos by our great listeners and viewers, perhaps even you specifically. Let's start with this one from cigar_ghost on YouTube comments. Cigar Ghost says, the Phillies are going to have to either spend like the Dodgers now or the late 90s or early 2000 Yankees, or overhaul their scouting and development team, because history has shown they cannot develop minor league talent that has success in Major League Baseball. And I think this is a fair evaluation if you only watch the Major League team right now. The Phillies have not had a homegrown outfielder make a major impact. They have trouble, it seems, developing high-level talent. They could get an Alec Bohm or a Bryson Stott. But when you look at the top players on the Phillies, Harper, Schwarber, Turner, Realmuto, Castellanos, all acquired from outside the organization. Wheeler, acquired from outside the organization when you start to look at pitching. They've done an okay job with the bullpen, but Duran and Matt Strahm, acquired from outside the organization. I guess the crown jewel of the Phillies farm system over the past couple of years has been Christopher Sanchez's development. But it's a fair point by Cigar Ghost when they bring up, hey, you haven't really developed well, so you're going to have to spend. There is one out, though, and I've talked about it. This is why it's so important that Andrew Painter, Aiden Miller, and Justin Crawford have an impact at the major league level this next year in some capacity. Looking for more of it from Painter and Crawford, who seem more major league ready than Miller. But when you have so few impact minor leaguers come up, it makes it so much more important that the few that you do find are big time players. So that's why there's going to be a lot put on the plate of Painter and Crawford this coming season, and potentially Miller, depending on how he develops at AAA. So a great point by Cigar Ghost. You could always spend, but they're going to spend that money on Kyle Schwarber, so it will be more of the same team going forward. I also talked recently about the Phillies free agents and whether or not I'd bring them back. We did stay or go recently on the podcast. And there were a couple of great comments. This one from Casey Markovich, 7991, and another one from Jeffrey Todd, 7017, where they both bring up disagreeing with me saying Bader goes. A lot of folks want Harrison Bader back. And some of the points they're making, plus defensive center fielder, the attitude that he brings and the changing culture felt very important for Harrison Bader. I don't disagree. I just wonder how he's going to get paid this offseason. Like, some team could look at what Harrison Bader did for the Phillies and pay him for the last month of his season. And that would probably be paying more than what Harrison Bader is worth over the course of 162 games. And with money already being committed to Kyle Schwarber's big-time contract, I believe, and potentially bringing back JT Realmuto, that may take Harrison Bader out of the Phillies market. They might say, listen, some team's going to pay you what you look like you're worth right now, and more power to you. We can't afford to potentially overpay you. We can give you a realistic deal based on what we think you are over 162 games, which is not, if you look at his career numbers, the player he was when he was hitting what felt like 500 for the Phillies down the stretch. And unfortunately, that may have the Phillies out on Harrison Bader. I will be ecstatic if they bring back Harrison Bader. I will, if the price is right. But just like, even as a fan, and what that guy does attitude-wise, I think is the biggest argument, because he just gave such a spark to this team in general. But I don't know that he's going to fit into the range of money the Phillies are willing to spend. And again, budget options could be the idea behind this offseason. That'll have a lot of people upset, myself included. But I'm more looking at what's reality and not so much the paramount view of how the offseason should go. Like, I have to look at the restrictions that John Middleton is giving Dave Dombrowski on payroll, and my propositions that we talk about for how they can change this have to work within those restrictions. I can't just say sign everybody, sign this player, sign that player. This isn't fantasy baseball, and I have to try and be realistic. So that's part of my Bader thoughts. The one more we'll get to here is MMR Seed commented about getting rid of Alec Bohm, because I talked about trading Bohm. You have him go to open up a spot to find more right-handed power at a position of third base where you should have a power bat, right? That's kind of natural baseball. You find power at the third base position. But MMR Seed says the constant talk of getting rid of Bohm is stupid, creating a need where there isn't one. Need to sign or replace Ranger, JT, Kyle, and Harrison Bader. And let's add a better third baseman to that. Here's the issue, right? As much as I don't want to create a hole where you don't need one, because I've already brought up multiple times the restrictions the Phillies are going to be under once they re-sign Kyle Schwarber and if they re-sign JT, you have to change something. Can you just continue to run back the same team? Like, you've got to change. It feels like you're beating your head against the wall if you just bring back the same guys and say, we won 96 games and we match up against the Dodgers. That feels like a comment that justifies Dave Dombrowski's comments of we were close to the Dodgers. We are at the point, folks, where the Phillies need change for change's sake. Now, I don't want to make the team worse, but I do want to make the team different. And if you re-sign Schwarber and re-sign Real Muto, which I think are positive moves given what the other options are, you got to change something. And Bohm's one of the few spots where you have that opportunity. That's why I talk about potentially moving on from Alec Bohm. So great comments. Even though I don't agree with all of them, I always appreciate you commenting on the YouTube or getting a hold of me on my social media and everything like that. It's very fun to interact with listeners, and giving you an opportunity for your thoughts to be heard on the podcast is something that we're going to focus on heavily throughout the offseason. That's all for today's episode of Locked On Phillies. Thank you again for joining us. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And please make sure you're rating, reviewing, subscribing to the YouTube, all that great stuff that really helps us out and helps you out. I'll talk to you tomorrow on the next episode of Locked On Phillies.